Vivarium 3 looked fine at first glance. A wide, sterile corridor led into the facility. It was dotted with various sealed doors marked with tiered clearance ratings. There were several biomes: humid jungle, Arctic tundra, and arid desert, enclosed within thick, smart glass walls, behind which feeding stations and cameras could be seen. Between each biome were the specimen rooms, containing technician workstations, cages, and screens showing the inside of the biome, along with a series of readings about what was going on inside. It smelled like a farm, and it was loud. Unlike other portions of Sublevel 3, most of the lab technicians in Sector Alpha had remained. They were busy logging things into wall-mounted terminals, or scurrying between vivarium chambers, checking samples or recording data. It was chaotic, but in a normal sort of way. Aegis wondered how long that sort of energy could hold. She almost asked her teammate why the techs had stayed when so many others had voluntarily gone into quarantine, but she held her tongue. Hawkeye walked several paces behind her, silent and unreadable as always. Aegis was not sure if the two of them had ever had a conversation about something not work-related, and she wasn't about to start now. The lab workers didn't even seem surprised to see them, most of them ignoring the two soldiers who stood out in their faceless black-on-black. She approached one wearing a lab coat, hoping the coat was some designation that they were higher up on the food chain of techs. "We're here on behalf of the Eclipse initiative. Why did you and your crew not voluntarily quarantine?" The man motioned around them. "And let the animals die? Who knows how long we'd be gone? We're taking precautions, and we're being very careful." "Precautions like what?" The tech rattled off a list of precautions, ranging from beginner to advanced, and she found herself looking around. None of the biomes showed any sign of damage or any abnormal behavior in the creatures. It was almost as if the breach was a rumor or an isolated incident. She'd just trekked through the main portion of Sublevel 3 herself and knew it was far from a rumor, but no one would know that looking at Vivarium 3. After what must have been a dozen examples, Aegis held up a hand to stop him. "Fine, but we've got orders to evacuate you anyway." The man's mouth twisted, but he didn't say anything. "Prepare your team. You can leave with us once our sweep is done, or you can wait for the medical quarantine team to arrive." "We'll wait," he said, dejected. "It will give us time to set up some auto feeders, at least." She nodded and turned away. "You're not going to go into the biomes, are you?" the tech asked, the slightest waver in his voice. "You'll scare them terribly, dressed the way you are." Aegis did not reply, and continued to move further into the facility. The techs were doing good work here. The fact they cared enough to stay, even when they had been given a chance to get away, spoke volumes about them. She'd been like that once. A helper, not a killer. However, the next room would make her think twice about the altruism the text showed. They reached a security door, and Aegis keyed it open. Beyond, the corridor was lined with cages on both sides. There were dozens of them, stacked 3 high, and all filled with small, furry rodents. As the two entered, the animals began to stir. Their noses twitched, their whiskers flicked nervously, and the sounds of their scritching paws came through the cages. It didn't sound right to her, but it was Hawkeye who was bothered enough to point it out. "It's synchronized," "What?" "The scratching," he explained. "It's synchronized." And he was right. It was rhythmic and consistent, like a pulse. When she peeked into one of the cages, it was home to 3 lemmings. All of them scurried back when they saw her masked face, hissing. And by all of them, she didn't mean just the 3 in the cage. Every lemming in the room scurried back. Their fur was standing up on end, their mouths stretched open in an eerie hiss, and their beady eyes focused on the 2 operatives. Hawkeye walked to the doorway again and hit the small switchboard there, plunging the entire room into darkness. She didn't need to ask him why. As soon as her eyes adjusted, she could see the faint blue glow coming from each of the cages. When she crept closer, she could see that it came from the eyes and mouths of the lemmings. Their normal black eyes shone with an icy glow, their mouths dimmer, but still shining. They sealed off that entire sector, marking it as Priority 1. They didn't even attempt to remove any of the cages. Once they were back in the hall, Hawkeye tapped on the screen outside the door a few times, and a faint hissing sound could be heard within. It was a built-in feature of the animal holding rooms. A quick and absolute death. But she knew they were going to get screamed at. 3 techs came running, one of them pulling at the now sealed door, while the other 2 decided to be equal parts brave and stupid by pushing her and Hawkeye. "What did you do?" one of them screamed. "You killed them! You killed them!" Hawkeye grabbed one of them by the scruff of their lab coat and tossed them indelicately aside. Aegis raised her rifle, not to shoot, but to strike the other assailant with the butt. Luckily, just the threat of it was enough. They stumbled backward, unhurt. "This was not a judgment call for you to make. Those cages were contaminated and could not be evacuated. They could have become an issue for your biomes if allowed to continue. It was necessary," Aegis tried to explain. She doubted it made a difference. The first tech picked themselves up and started to go back for the door, but one of the other techs, the one Hawkeye had thrown against the wall, stepped in to stop him. "They're right. It's too late anyway. Let's just go." They allowed themselves to be shooed away, but not without a few hateful stares cast over their shoulders. She and Hawkeye stood in the hallway, looking at the closed door, and then at one another. Hawkeye turned away to head further down the hall, and she followed him. Aegis didn't know if what they had done was the right thing, or if they should have warned the techs and let them decide. She also thought she would feel more guilty, but there was just a subdued sort of sadness in her chest, and nothing else. They moved deeper into the sector, finding that most of the rooms had been emptied. Apparently, it was only the hands-on techs who had felt compelled to stay behind. It was a tedious process, checking each cage to make sure they weren't hiding a clandestine collection of myco-infected parakeets, or something similar. They hadn't seen any signs of life for over an hour when both of them stopped. A wet, coughing sound echoed out from one of the nearby rooms. They both froze, and Hawkeye held up a fist as if Aegis needed a command to stop moving. She scowled behind her mask. The coughing sounds repeated, a sharp, hacking sound. It originated from a room labeled Wet Specimens, which was disturbing enough on its own, but she was also positive that it was a person making the noise and not another animal. They raised their rifles and crept forward, but death had already made his mark long before they arrived. The man was slumped against a wall near an emergency IWAS station. He was wearing a filthy umbral janitorial uniform, stained with black-green bile. The wall around him was a similar mess, the liquid congealed in a thick, tar-like state. His hands clutched weakly at his chest, and there was blood smeared around his mouth and chin, mixing with the foul secretions to drip down and stain the collar of his uniform. And all over him, MycoNexus fungus grew, brilliantly blue, even under the already bright fluorescent lights. He looked up as they entered, but the whites of his eyes were the color of an ink bottle. His chest rattled as he tried to suck in air, and Aegis moved closer, keeping her weapon aimed at his chest. She didn't need to ask him to piece together the story of why he was hiding in the depths of the vivarium sector. He'd been infected for some time and came there to hide. A quiet place to die. His coughing fit passed, and his eyes found Hawkeye. His hands scrambled for purchase as he pushed himself back upright, and his head shook back and forth in denial. "No," he gasped. You're not allowed in here." Hawkeye cocked his head, and his hands flexed on the gun. The man didn't seem to be a threat, but there was always a chance the fungi growth could make him dangerous. His movements were already jerky and stuttering. His speech slurred. The myco was overtaking his brain. The janitor pushed himself to his feet, and the movement seemed to set off another coughing fit, his entire body doubling over. "Stay down," she commanded. He ignored her and turned, lurching into a run. His shoes scuffed across the floor, the noise uneven as his foot caught and dragged across the tile. Her mind worked in slow motion. The infected man could have been immunocompromised, maybe an organ transplant recipient, making him more susceptible to early infection. If he had stayed down, she would have gotten his name, maybe the name of his wife or kids to make delivering the news easier, and she would have taken his last words. But he didn't stay down, and he was closer to Aegis than he was to Hawkeye. She saw the bruised lines of infection running up the veins of his neck like branches in a tree. Aegis didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired. It was a perfect shot, right between the eyes, and the man fell. She wondered if he would have thanked her in another life. Despite his face not being visible, she could feel Hawkeye staring at her. She waited for him to make a comment, but he was silent. They sealed the room, marked it high priority, and did one last sweep of the floor. When they returned to the vivariums, the techs decided to stay and wait for the quarantine team to arrive. She and Hawkeye informed them that there was no timeline, and it might be days before they were able to leave, even to get food or water. But they insisted there were plenty of supplies there. Aegis knew they'd eat animal kibble if they had to, but that was none of her business. Most of her was numb and buzzing, but there was a grudging respect somewhere deep in her chest. She pushed all the high-calorie nutritional gel packs she had in her medkit into the hands of the tech who had shoved Hawkeye earlier when her teammate wasn't looking. A little gift for his act of service. If the vivarium scientists and techs were going to make a last stand, at least it was a noble one. She knew logically that they'd be rescued within a few days if they were uninfected. The sentiment remained.
To Director L. Corvin,
Umbral Intelligence Division. From Dr. Halim Nayar, Department of Applied Microbial Systems, Dunwalt University. I debated writing this letter, and I assume I will regret it as soon as it's sent. But I knew the team that was in Sully Cave with Dr. Sylvane, and I owe it to them to try. I have no lost love for Umbral or any megacorporation, but those were my students, my peers, and my friends that died in that damned cave. All of that is to say, Esme Sylvane was the weakest physically on that team. She may be more brilliant than all of their minds, plus mine combined. But it makes no sense for her to be the sole survivor. Before the descent, she was already erratic, emotionally volatile, and prone to obsession. I can't imagine her time beneath the earth helped any. Esme was a fair spelunker, but she failed the module twice before she was cleared to enter Sully Cave. The rest of them were an already established team, and they were experienced in underground operations. I've read every report, but conveniently all but hers are incomplete. I don't believe that she survived. I believe she made herself the last one standing. Now, Umbral has her set up in a brand new lab with a bunch of underlings, and I've heard rumors she is visibly tainted by the same mycelium she was studying. I know you won't take action, but my conscience can't rest until I've tried. Your scientists working under Esme don't deserve the same fate she forced on mine. Proceed carefully. She is not who you think she is. Signed, Dr. Halim Nayar. Tempest lowered her rifle slowly, letting the silence of the lab around them settle again. The ruined bodies of 4 enormous rats, hairless and covered in splotches of MycoNexus, twitched on the ground in front of the 2 soldiers before finally going still. It took 10 seconds for them to dissolve into a pile of glowing blue glue dotted with bones, and only 5 more for Jester to incinerate them with the flamethrower he'd been assigned for the mission. You know, he said, wiping fungal rat goo off his boot and onto a nearby chair. I used to think this place was just a big, morally gray entity, but now I'm convinced they're just playing God for fun. What about this is fun? She asked, exasperated. He waved a hand dismissively at the ruined lab around them. Most of it had been torn to pieces by the rats they had been forced to put down. These scientists have got to get something out of doing this, don't they? A paycheck? Jester shook his head, stepping over to the console in the back of the room. He flipped through a few screens, tapping away until finally, the light above the door at the other end of the lab clicked from red to green. They had one more lab to go, but it had been a horror show from start to finish. Some of the uninfected had managed to lure the infected into Sector Beta long before Ares arrived, which made their sector a ticking time bomb that Tempest and Jester had to clean up. It had started simply. 2 lab techs had done each other in blocking a locked door full of other infected that had a little more zest for life. Jester had tossed an incendiary grenade inside, and while it did its job, it also set off the sprinkler system and triggered the release of several more doors in the immediate area. They were able to radio Sentinel, who had Exo disable the sprinklers, but the damage was done. They took cover behind an overturned workstation and fended off the 10 infected easily, but the sprinkler water made it impossible for Jester to burn most of them, meaning they had to seal the rooms and take the long way around. Now they were nearly done. The epicenter of the outbreak was considered to be the mycology department, and Sentinel had decided they'd approach that one as a full team. The last lab was smaller, lights humming, everything clean and pristine. Every workstation was empty, and when they pulled the floor plan up on their interfaces, the measurements didn't add up. Jester radioed Sentinel.
Hey boss, we're in lab H17, but it doesn't match the floor plans.
Tempest walked the perimeter of the room, knocking on the walls with the butt of her rifle until one panel sounded different, hollow. When she looked closer, the air was a few degrees cooler in front of it. Tell Sentinel we've got a secret door. See if Exo can unlock it remotely for us. After a few moments, Sentinel replied to them.
He can't even find evidence of the door, so that's a no-go. Breach it.
Jester took his time placing the breaching charges, and once it was done, they moved to the back of the room before detonating them. A series of small explosions echoed, and the hidden door groaned, falling backward until it hit the floor with a loud thump. A chill rolled out of the now open room, and when they entered, rifles held at the ready, there was nothing but cryo storage units. The walls were lined with them, glass-fronted and tall. They were thick with frost, as if it had been some time since someone had entered this room, and all of them bore the same labels. Hemlock, failed specimens. Tempest hesitated, looking at Jester, who nodded for her to continue. Her breath fogged the air, where it escaped her mask, and a feeling of dread had settled in her stomach. Slowly, she reached out and wiped away the frost on the cryo unit closest to her. She didn't dare open it and let some other pathogen escape. Tempest went still, and when she didn't answer Jester the first time he called out, the demolitions expert stepped next to her. Her hand shot out and grabbed his arm, her words shaky. Is that... Yeah, I think so. She already knew, of course, but it had taken Jester's confirmation for it to really sink in. Inside the unit were 5 shelves, each with a clear specimen container. Inside each was a humanoid form, small and twisted. Some of them were simply pale, others translucent, and the one on the top shelf had a blue tint to its skin. Fungal growths, frozen in time, grew on a few, running down their little spines. Others had the ink blots beneath their skin, unmoving in death. The one at eye level with her was a little girl. A little girl they had used as a test subject. Tempest felt like vomiting, and she bit the inside of her cheek hard. Her mouth filled with blood, but she felt no pain. Jesus, Jester whispered, and then he stepped away, furiously speaking on the comms to Sentinel.
Patch me over to Brighton. I just want to talk to him, Sentinel. I just have some fucking questions, okay?
She didn't understand what he wanted with their contact until her eyes refocused and she was able to read the labels on the containers. Each had an ID number, and beside it, researchers, Dr. Brighton, Dr. Sylvane.
Internal Umbral correspondence. Transfer requests. Department Micology, Dr. E. Sylvane. Request 1, filed April 3rd. Analyst, R. Teller. Subject, transfer request. I'd like to formally request a transfer to any alternate department. Dr. Sylvane's methods have become increasingly erratic, and I believe a reassignment would be beneficial to my performance and mental health. Request 2, filed April 6th. Follow-up transfer request. I haven't received a response. There's something wrong in the lab. People are whispering. I'm not the only one who's noticed. Request 3, filed April 8th. Urgent, immediate reassignment. She knows I filed these. I saw her looking at me like she could see through me. I don't feel safe. Something is happening. This place isn't right. I need out. Please. Please respond. Final update. Filed April 9th. Disregard previous requests. Disregard prior communications. Everything is fine. I misunderstood. I'd like to remain in Dr. Sylvane's department. I see clearly now. The work is beautiful. Prior requests redacted by request of sender.
Sentinel muted Jester's comm feed long enough to contact Howard Brighton for himself.
Dr. Brighton, this is Sentinel. Sentinel? What have you found? You tell me, he paused. My team just found the secret door in Lab H7.
There was a long silence, and then Brighton, dejected, said,
Stand by.
The line was dead for 15 seconds. And then the exobiologist returned.
I've been authorized to clarify a few things. What you found is part of a project, and I can assure you those specimens were not Homo sapiens. We've been using species of different biologics to create them. The details aren't necessary.
Sentinel almost laughed.
Try me. Well, I will say that this project didn't begin until Sylvane joined us. I will also say that this project's goal was to diminish the loss of life experienced by Umbral's current fighting forces.
What in the hell did that mean? He wondered.
What else can you tell me? Nothing, Sentinel. I'm sorry. I will reiterate that I believe Sylvane's lab is ground zero for the outbreak.
He said his next words slowly, as if he wanted to make sure Sentinel heard them.
I'm missing a number of my chimera samples, and she's the only one I know with the clearance to access them. I hope you manage to get this under control as soon as possible.
The line cut, and Sentinel's hands curled into a fist by his thigh. His blank-faced combat android stood quietly beside him, and Sentinel turned to Exo, suddenly furious for a fraction of a second. He doused the flame of his anger instantly. That was not an emotion acceptable for a squad leader, especially not one of his caliber. Exo, do you know what Dr. Brighton was referencing? Negative. I have very limited access outside of anything related to Ares or our missions. He exhaled slowly. Sentinel wasn't going to get anything else out of Brighton, and it was time for them to confront Sylvane. He could worry about all the other implications later.
Ares, we're initiating the final sweep. Report.
Static. And then...
This is Aegis. We've cleared Vivarium 3. 2 active mutations, one animal, one human. Both neutralized. A number of uninfected civilians have remains but are aware they are to leave with medical quarantine.
Then, sounding less tense than he had 5 minutes ago.
This is Jester. We've encountered a number of active mutations in Sector Beta. All are neutralized. We've also discovered an unmapped room. I marked it on the interface map. Copy.
Sentinel replied. He pulled up the digital map and marked Sylvane's lab.
All teams converge on the mycology lab. Seal off all accessible rooms and junctions as you go. No survivors are to follow you and must wait for medical quarantine Team 1. See you soon.
He closed the comms and looked towards the reinforced bulkhead that led to the center hub of Sublevel 3. Exo, scan for active threats. Negative. No unmarked lifeforms detected within a 10-meter radius. Warning. Passive readings are unstable. Environmental contamination rising. He checked the seal of his gas mask and nodded. Let's go then. It took him 10 minutes to reach the central hub. Aegis and Hawkeye had arrived first, with Jester and Tempest 2 minutes behind him. Being back with the team settled something in him, something that had felt out of place since the morgue. Sentinel wasn't looking forward to potentially putting down the woman they had worked so damn hard to recover from Soli Cave not all that long ago. But the things he'd seen, hell, the things they'd all seen, were enough to justify it. He'd called in a request on the way to the center hub, and just as all the team came together, he got his response. A buzz crackled in his ear.
This is Command. Ares is authorized to apprehend Dr. Esme Sylvane. Lethal force may be used as a last resort. If lethal force is used, footage of the incident from Ares' Exo unit will be examined.
And then Howard buzzed in once more.
Her lab has a number of failsafes, and she's probably sealed herself in the inner core. I'm sure you can breach it with enough time, but if you overload the decontamination vent system, it will trigger a system reset. There's a small panel near the door to her lab beneath the security scanner, unmarked. Trip it, and you have 3 minutes before the interlock re-engages. Good luck.
3 minutes. An impossibly short time for an unknown amount of adversaries. But they were Ares. It would have to be good enough.
Journal entry day 191. Received my weekly amphotericin B infusion. It burns more now. Maybe because more of my body is myco each visit. I make it home before the purge starts. It pushes the drug out through my skin, my breath, my pores in a single violent purge. Every inch of me leaks. I collapse on the floor, too weak to move, shaking until it's done. The pain defies explanation. The apartment is coated now. Thin layers of it shimmer on the walls, across the floors. It's part of the MycoNexus, and the MycoNexus is part of me. No one knows. No one can ever. It's awake, and I am listening. Signed, E.S.
Jester inhaled and let the adrenaline flow, washing away the earlier rage. He locked the image of those embryos away in his mind to deal with at a later date. Or never. Probably never. The trauma vault was still letting him cram things inside and didn't show any signs of stopping. So what did it matter? He bounced from foot to foot a few times while Sentinel gave the command. "Exo, decontamination vent system override." "Yes, Sentinel." The machine moved, kneeling, its hand opening like a flower as it unscrewed the small panel. The screwdriver retracted back into Exo's arm, replaced by a cluster of filaments that flowed inside and got to work. After a few seconds, a hiss of steam burst out, and Exo stood. An alert blinked red on their HUDs. Security override. 3 minutes. "Stack and breach," Sentinel ordered. Ares moved like water, Aegis and Hawkeye to the left, Tempest and Jester to the right. Sentinel on point with Exo right behind. The door groaned open, revealing an empty, sterile-looking hallway. Their masks filtered the air, but he could still catch the slightest scent of mildew. They moved fast. The hallway was the only pristine thing about the mycology department, a last final mask to deter any invaders. The labs themselves were destroyed, papers scattered and glass broken across the floor. It crunched as they stepped over it, a single objective in mind. The next lab had a coffee cup cracked in half on the floor, data pads still blinking where they were abandoned. Jester knew he might be imagining it, but he thought there was a slight sheen to it all. "Possible hostiles ahead. Number unknown, life signatures vague." Their weapons were already raised. "Sweep and clear," Sentinel barked. "The only infected that needs to be spared is Sylvane." The last lab in the department contained Sylvane's inner core, the small area of mycology that had the clearance level X. They still had time, 1 minute and 15 seconds to get to her before the locks re-engaged. A soft shimmer coated everything in the final lab, the walls, equipment, and even the floor beneath their boots. It was déjà vu. They were looking at the MycoNexus, just like they had at Sully Cave. It wasn't just airborne spores or slight contamination. The fungus had colonized the lab, crawling up the wall, sparkling galactic blue, as soft and fuzzy in some places as animal fur. It was beautiful, even where it had crawled over and started to consume Sylvane's team. One of the dead mycologists twitched. Jester stepped forward, and the rest of the team stepped back, and he activated the flamethrower. It all burned so easily, even the corpses that tried to stand to avenge the MycoNexus that was now piloting them. "Contact left!" Aegis snapped. He disengaged the flamethrower, and the entire team turned, opening fire. There weren't many of them, but they unsettled him, even as the fungus behind him burned. They were eyeless, sockets weeping blue, and a few of them had missing jaws, tongues lolling out into the open air. "We've got to get the damned door open," Aegis grit out. Sentinel grunted in agreement as bullets flew. "Hawkeye, Exo, get it done." Jester was beside Tempest, the floor beneath his boots sticky with ooze and fungus and congealed blood. His head swam for a second as something dripped from the ceiling and landed on his visor. They needed to be on the other side of that door in 10 seconds. Exo moved fast while Hawkeye covered it, kneeling at the door lock and twisting the metal in its hands. It groaned, bending until finally he was able to tear the whole panel apart, metal screeching on metal as he tore the door off its hinges and threw it across the lab. 8 seconds. But now they were in. The alarms sounded. Aegis shouldered her rifle and plunged her tactical knife into the empty socket of one infected. Tempest twisted the neck of another, and the dry-rotted spine gave way with a snap, body slumping to the floor. Holy shit! Jester couldn't help but laugh. Tempest stared at the severed head in her hands for a fraction of a second before throwing it away from her. Just as the last infected fell, a figure, tall and slender, emerged from the inner core. Dr. Esme Sylvane, her skin iridescent sapphire, not just in small blotches, but in enormous starbursts. Her glasses were askew as she approached, and she was barefoot, face impassive, as if she'd been expecting them all along. Then, the faintest hint of a smile. Jester said. Hold fire, Sentinel said. No one lowered their rifles, but the air was still. You again, Esme sighed. Haven't we danced this dance before? Dr. Sylvane, Sentinel called. We are under direct orders from Central Command. You're to surrender and be detained in a sealed quarantine room where you will await the medical quarantine team before questioning. Sylvane laughed, and it sounded like parchment. She spread her arms slowly, gesturing to the disgusting, fungus-covered battleground. Can you detain all of me? Come on. Try. Ares didn't get a chance to, because the MycoNexus answered her instead. The carpet of fungus rolled beneath his feet as creatures and dead lab workers alike poured from the ventilation system in the inner core where they had been hidden with Sylvane. They seemed to scream as one, a thin sound of rage at the audacity of Ares to test the MycoNexus yet again. Tempest and Exo opened fire first, the rest of the team spreading out in a horseshoe to cover all corners of the onslaught. Jester pivoted, fired, pivoted again, his actions less of a thought and more muscle memory like always. Ares moved too fast for complete thoughts sometimes. The upper half of a woman, fuzzy and cerulean, crawled towards him before his bullets split her down the center. Sylvane didn't move as the bullets whipped past her, her lab coat blowing. One struck her, right below the shoulder, but she didn't move, didn't bleed. She grinned as a piece of shrapnel took her glasses from her face, severing the tip of her nose. Mania reflected in her wide, luminous eyes. Merge, she breathed, and her voice came from every infected, every cluster of MycoNexus. Merge, and no peace. The floor rolled again, and Jester lost his balance, correcting it into a roll behind an overturned table. He took a second to breathe, looking around to see what his next move was. When his eyes landed on something strange, something he'd learned about in training but hadn't seen implemented. It was the switch for an old fire decontamination override system. It was trapped behind a yellowed pane of glass, sealed away and untouched by the fungus. It must have been installed way back when the lab was built. It was old and analog as hell compared to the advanced technologies that now ran through Eclipse headquarters. The systems were considered methods of last resort, filled with an extremely flammable magnesium powder. The chemical-based system would disperse magnesium dust throughout the entire lab, and while the powder was airborne, an ignition flame would be activated, causing everything, from the ceiling to the floor and everything in between, to catch fire. Shortly after this, the fire suppression system would activate, smothering the flames. This process could sterilize a lab in minutes, without compromising its structural integrity. Jester thought that structural integrity was already screwed, seeing how the walls were crawling with fungus. The systems were phased out quickly, being as violent and dangerous as they were, but when Jester saw the switch behind the old glass, he felt for a second like he was looking into the face of God. He moved before he could think of any downsides, sprinting and ducking, shotgun out now as he blasted a path through the infected. He reached the panel, smashed through the glass with his elbow, and slammed the override down. A slow, metallic clunk echoed through the ceiling, and goosebumps raised up on every inch of his skin. "Everyone out!" he yelled, suddenly realizing he should have at least told them before he enacted his plan. "This place is gonna blow!" Sentinel, older than Jester, glanced at the override switch and his spine stiffened like he'd been electrocuted. "Go, go, go! Seal the door!" Sylvane and her minions didn't know what was happening, but they could sense the change in the energy as Ares sprinted away, abandoning the fight. As Jester, the last to exit, stepped into the hall, a hand shot out and pulled him forward, flames licking at his back through the last crack of the door. Hawkeye steadied him on his feet, and they all turned to face the door to the mycology lab, as if trying to see through the destruction and beyond. Inside, a small flame had ignited within the override system, and brilliant white-blue flames roared through the lab, curling across the ceiling and burning into every crevice. The MycoNexus howled, not in one voice, but thousands as it died. The flames caught every spore, every strand, and Esme Sylvane was consumed. She curled in on herself, falling, and left nothing but charred ivory-white bones behind. Alarms that hadn't been heard in decades echoed throughout the compound, warning everyone to shelter in place as the emergency system ran its course. It would be contained to the mycology lab, if everything worked correctly. But safety was still a top priority when setting an entire room on fire. The blaze lasted seconds before the suppression system kicked on, water pouring from above and quickly snuffing the flames. Just in case, the sprinklers in the adjoining rooms were also activated, and Ares waited under an unnatural rainstorm as smoke curled under the doorway in front of them. The water continued to pour for several minutes before slowing down, and Sentinel tapped the control panel next to the door. The display read, "Manual sterilization cycle complete, all systems clean." He unlocked it, opening the door to a blackened room. They walked in carefully, Sentinel on point and Exo guarding their rear. The entire lab had been sterilized. Every fungus spore eradicated, every trace of it burned to a crisp. It was black from top to bottom. Jester saw Sentinel wince, his hand going to the side of his helmet, and the commander began his long explanation of what in the hell just happened. Once he was done letting the command center know the lab was secured, he told them. "Target neutralized." Command replied to all of them.
"Target neutralization confirmed. Mission complete. Report to sublevel C elevators and wait for decontamination."
Pieces of the MycoNexus were still all over the mycology lab and other places throughout sublevel C, but the levels were containable. Not the full-scale war that had spawned around Esme Sylvane. He looked down at the rictus grin of Sylvane's skull, thought about the vibrant, strange woman they thought they had rescued from the cave, and shoved it all into the same box as all the other horrible things he'd experienced. It accepted Jester's offering and closed right up for him.
Umbro Biotech Division. Internal classified file, level X clearance required. Project. Hybridization entity for multiphasic linkage, organic control and kinetics. Hemlock. Lead researchers. Dr. Howard Brighton, exobiology. Date redacted. Location. Sublevel 3B. Exobiology Containment Center A. Summary. A new batch of 6 mycochimera hybrid specimens was cultivated under revised protocols following the termination of Dr. Esme Sylvane and the subsequent neutralization of the central MycoNexus system. Majority of subjects exhibited varying levels of cellular instability and neurostructural degeneration within the first 48 hours. The outcomes are as follows. Specimens 1 through 5 terminated due to rapid necrosis and loss of neurostability. Specimen 6 survived. Subject continues to grow. Cellular integration appears stable. Cognitive activity registered. Monitoring continues under full containment and surveillance per umbral guidelines. This is the end of my report.
Dr. Howard Brighton stood in the observation room adjacent to the growth chamber. Arms folded, eyes narrowed as he watched Subject 6 move, slow, deliberate, almost curious. A silhouette against the low blue lighting. It didn't twitch or scream or claw at its own flesh. It breathed, and it looked up at him. His bionic eye whirred. He exhaled. For the first time in weeks, a small laugh slipped past his lips, sharp, unexpected, almost disbelieving. It echoed in the empty room around him. He quieted again just as fast, somber eyes still on the glass. He whispered to the silence. "We did it, Esme."